The Bulls have done it again. Winners of the Australia Cup in 2022 and 2024. On that day, 2 years ago, they were up against an NPL side in Sydney, were firmly expected to win and did so. This weekend, however, in Melbourne, against strong opposition with a hostile atmosphere, they were forced to do it the hard way, and that they did. Frustrating Melbourne victory and taking their chance with aplomb when it was eventually presented. A first major trophy for Mile Stejovski, a second for the Bulls, another foray into Asia, and the perfect way to cap off pre-season. The headlines, however, were dominated by the exclusion of Daniel Arzani from not just the starting 11, but the entire matchday squad by Patrick Kisnorbo. So-called experimentation in the final doesn't quite seem a satisfactory excuse, and in a tight 1-0 loss, he sure would have been handy on the pitch. But that doesn't mean that it was the wrong call, but definitely there's an early blunder in the Kisnorbo era. The Champions Leagues are back for their second match day. Tony Popovic has hired his Socceroos backroom staff. An Australian national team went undefeated through a round of qualification. What a shock. And the A-Leagues are getting a new TV show on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight is Christian Montegan. Christian, hello to you. You're in the box for us covering the Cup final on Sunday. How was that experience?
Yeah, great experience. First football media accreditation. So yeah, pretty cool experience to see how it all works in the media box. A bit nervy, not knowing what to expect early on. But no, once everything sort of settled down, it was, great experience, like I said, and a thoroughly entertaining game that we'll delve into.
Do I dare ask what the atmosphere was like in the stadium when the Bulls were presented the trophy?
Close to silence, I'd say.
It's one of these just peculiar facets. Obviously, Australia is so big. It always makes travelling support so hard. And yes, Melbourne Victory fans quite quick to get out of the stadium. It didn't exactly provide the joyous atmosphere, Jacob Stevens, that is deserving of a cup trophy lift.
No, but it's also the first time since the reboot of the competition that the away team has won in the final.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone else that has really come close. Adelaide and Sydney played one that went into extra time, where Sydney eventually ended up the winner. But other than that, I can't really think of one where the home team hasn't looked like they've had the advantage. And for most of the game, Victory did look like they had the advantage and they looked on top, but just could not put the ball in the back of the net, which, has been a criticism of this Victory squad throughout last season as well. And even now under a new coach, it doesn't seem like things have necessarily changed. But a bit of a shame that, it wasn't a chance for Macarthur to celebrate, a second trophy in front of some home fans. But credit to all those who did travel, especially in relatively short notice. I do love the dedication that some supporters show in this country because, as you said, Lockie, it's so difficult to travel around Australia and very expensive as well. So those who do it, my hat's off to you.
All right, well, we will give Macarthur their plaudits, but of course the top story today and the controversy dominated through this game, started more than an hour before kickoff when we learnt that Daniel Arzani, one of Melbourne Victory's best players, it must be said, was excluded, not just from the starting 11, but the entire squad. This was an absolutely bizarre decision on the surface of things. We all saw a Joey Lynch tweet when the teams were released. He said he asked the club why Arzani was excluded, and the response he got was that Kisnorbo was, quote, experimenting and looking at different options ahead of round 1 of the A-League season, which Arzani is suspended for. Experimenting the squad for a cup final and a place in Asia seemed absolutely ludicrous. Personally, I'm not buying that line at all. Christian, there were some rumours of a bust-up at training, just rumours, no confirmation of anything, but we do know that Arzani's attitude has caused issues in the past at some of his previous clubs. But for me, a key sticking point here is that Patrick Kisnorbo denied any of that such fallout in his post-game presser when he was asked about it, which I think leaves him in a very precarious position because as far as periods of forgiveness goes for fresh coaches, Kisnorbo already has a lot less to work with than others. For Victory fans, throughout the end of his playing career and into the start of his coaching career, he was the enemy, and that opinion has not changed in the eyes of a lot of people. Now, of course, fans will always be open to new coaches bringing them success, but he has to be absolutely perfect. And for me, he has made a blunder here, and that blunder is not necessarily leaving Daniel Arzani out of the matchday squad because I think we've learned in world football that managing the mentality of a playing group overall is a very important thing to do. And sometimes removing that, I'm not saying that Daniel Arzani is, but removing a toxic element from that squad can be the better long-term solution. However, either one of two things has happened. Either Kisnorbo really is just experimenting, which in my opinion is a monumentally silly decision in an Australia Cup final, or he is lying to Melbourne Victory supporters about the true reason about this exclusion. And in an era of the A-League where fans are continually used to being manipulated and not told the whole truth, I think that is a very dangerous situation to be in.
And unfortunately, I think it's the latter. I think he's lied to the Victory fans. I was in that press conference and Anna Harrington did really well, just stamped her authority, asked the questions, really diligently to Patrick. And I think it was about 4 or 5 questions. And Patrick got really annoyed at the end. He was like, "Oh, this is the 6th time you've asked me about Arzani." And he was getting really riled up about it. He didn't really want anything to do with it. And when he answered the first couple of questions, it took him a few seconds to pause and think about his answer. And I thought, okay, this is already a bit strange. And before the game, when I saw the news, I thought, surely something has happened behind the scenes, because you don't play Arzani for the previous 4 games of the Australia Cup and then all of a sudden say, okay, I'm going to try and experiment here. And the excuse he came up with was that he's suspended for the round 1 fixture of the opening season. And even then, that's not, for me, that's just not a valid excuse to drop someone for this magnitude of a game. Australia Cup final, it's either, you're taking the mickey out of it or you want to actually try and win a trophy. So from that perspective, 99% for me, something has happened behind the scenes. You mentioned those rumors, Lockie, about a bust up in training. Those came out today, but yesterday everyone was a bit in the dark about what actually did happen. Arzani has had troubles, previously, with his attitude, stuff about, his defensive work rate, stuff like that. Apparently these rumors say that, Arzani hasn't been happy for a while, and it sort of came up to boiling point, essentially. And from that perspective, I guess you got to put some of the blame on Arzani. We don't know the full details, but you've got to be a team player at the same time. And something must have really happened, badly for Kisnorbo to say, okay, you're going to be sitting out in this one, because I'm sure Kisnorbo would have sat down and thought, okay, if this is going to make huge headlines, and I've got to be prepared to answer the tough questions. So you've just got to think that something massively bad has happened behind the scenes, which I'm sure has done. And in the end, it's cost Victory, because in the final third, they didn't look overly convincing. They had those few chances in the first half, and then the second half, I thought Stojovski, really managed the game well, which we'll talk on a bit more. But in terms of Arzani, in general, it's going to be fascinating to see, does he stay at the club? Are there a few clubs interested now with this situation? Because after an incident like this, surely it's going to be very difficult to see that relationship mend. And Kisnorbo also added in the press conference that, this is a professional decision. He was also asked, is that going to derail their relationship at all? He said, no, we're 2 professionals. It's the nature of sport. But at the same time, when you get this big of a clash, is it, too late to heal?
It's interesting that you bring up, will clubs be interested in him? Because according to the rumors, that seems to be what might have sparked this off in the first place anyway, was that Victory were looking at shopping him around a little bit, which in itself is a whole other can of worms in terms of why you'd want to get rid of arguably the squad's most dangerous playmaker, most explosive playmaker. Young, got that fire in him, clearly loves the club. I mean, you look back at the derby last year with him singing Stand By Me before the game and stuff, like, it just boggles the mind to think why the club would be looking at shopping him around, which is part of what makes the rumours seem so outlandish. Like, why would the club be actively looking at getting rid of him? But, and I was talking to Lockie about this before we started the recording, if this is true and there's been a bust up in training and things, you can't expect anything different, right? There's got to be a line that you draw as a coach in terms of the discipline of your squad. It doesn't matter how important a player is. If they cross that line, if they do something wrong, you've got to set the standard and you've got to set an example of it. Carl Viet did it a couple of years ago with Nestor Irankunda when he refused to pick up cones after training. And he said, right, okay, yep, you're not in the squad for the original rivalry game. It's things like that where you've got to have your standards set as a club and as a team. And if you're not meeting that standard as a player, then you don't deserve to get in the squad. But then it does come back to that dichotomy of, is he telling the truth and it's an experimentation? In which case, yeah, that is a silly thing. And, hindsight would say that Victory probably could have really used Arzani in that game, the sort of player with the ball at feet who can just make things happen. And against sort of that lower block that Macarthur were putting out with a lot of bodies behind the ball in the second half, somebody that could really have, sort of broken something open in the box. And that does seem foolish. And then on the other side, if he's lying, that's not a fantastic look either. So it's a really, difficult and precarious situation for sure.
I actually don't buy into the idea that Arzani would, probably have made a huge impact on this game. We'll talk about the actual football a little bit later, but, Victory were very dynamic at times. But in terms of the isolated incident, Christian, I just don't know if it was a disciplinary issue. Surely fans would have been more receptive to Kisnorbo coming out and saying it was a disciplinary issue. Like, you don't have to say anything more. You don't have to embarrass anyone, but at least give fans enough information so they know the context. And I think a lot of people would be understanding of that. And they, part of Kisnorbo's response was the fact that, this isn't about Daniel, it's about the team. And in some respects, I think he was telling the truth in that way, because taking Daniel out of the team, again, if it was a disciplinary issue, benefits the team. But I don't understand the logic in then trying to manipulate what you're telling to the media and what you're telling to fans.
And for me, that's where he's ultimately stuffed up, to be honest. You mentioned at the start, Lockie, he doesn't have much lean room for, any mistakes, because there was a divide when he first got appointed. Former Melbourne City coach, he had to prove a lot of people. And I think that opinion was slightly shifting after these first few Australia Cup games. We did start to see an identity. Even us on the podcast, we were debating whether Victory, are the best team in the league coming into the new season. So it's not like they weren't set up for good success. But now after this incident's occurred, it's caused doubt into minds of fans, and surely that's not good. Heading into a new campaign where you've got to, gain the trust of the supporter base once again, because at the start, that's what he had to do, right? Not everyone was fully on board with that decision. And if he was just upfront and honest and said, this is what's happened, you didn't have to embarrass Arzani, like you said, Lockie, but just come out and say, okay, disciplinary issue or what have not. It didn't have to be a whole lot of information, and just leave it at that. Didn't have to go too much more in detail. But now after this, it's brewed up a new storm that it wasn't necessary. And with the Calvid situation, was he honest, Jacob, about the Irankunda situation, or was it a similar case with Kisnorbo?
No, from what I remember, he actually came out in the pre-match press conference a couple of days before the game, when the squads were released for it, and Irankunda wasn't in there, and he was asked, so why is Irankunda not in there? And it was straight off the bat a case of, he didn't meet the training standards or something. And then obviously came out later that it was because of disciplinary things. But was honest about what the problem was. And the fans were still not particularly happy because you're missing Irankunda for a massive game. But I mean, Adelaide actually handled that game pretty well without him anyway. But it was still a case of the fans still weren't too happy, because here's this promising player that's been the most exciting attacking threat for a while, and
but he was still up front though. He was still up front.
Yeah, he was up front.
And for Kisnorbo, if he did the same, okay, fans might have still been angry that Arzani was left out of the squad altogether, but at the same time, they would have had the excuse of, okay, Kisnorbo's lying, and it builds on this rhetoric that, the trust factor of it all, which coming in was a bit of an issue for Kisnorbo. So he's played himself into a bit of a hole.
Yeah, you got these Victory fans who are already thinking, okay, you're the Melbourne City guy, you're the spy of sorts, that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And then you're coming out and not telling the whole truth about a player situation. I think, it's very dangerous. He's wiped out a lot of the good favour, Christian, as you say, that he earned throughout the earlier stages of the Australia Cup. Let's give some praise to the Bulls. They are the winning side. They make it 2 Australia Cups in 3 years. First trophy for Milos Stejovski. No Valencia man. Most people, including us, didn't give him a whole lot of a chance. But Christian, they've claimed another cup, 2 Australia Cups for the Bulls. There's a lot of A-League teams that can't boast 2 domestic trophies. The Bulls have done it in a very short space of time.
And you can rightly argue that victory deserved the base of the dominance of the game. They should have put the game to bed in the first half with those few chances. Virgos skying a shot over the bar. There was a penalty shout, which I thought was a penalty, but with no VAR technology, that wasn't possible for the ref to have a second look. So there were chances for victory, but Macarthur, they had one shot on target the whole game. It was that goal in the 58th minute from Yakulos. Great counter-attack. As well, perfectly timed. And that's all this Macarthur side needs, because Stejovski after the game admitted that during the Australia Cup, this campaign, that they've been really defensively solid. And that's one aspect that Millet has been really impressed with compared to last season, where he said he felt as though Macarthur, they let loose a lot of games, they let loose some leads that they should have held on to, and they weren't defensively resolute for the whole 90 minutes. But now he's seen more of a compact unit, and you saw that throughout the game. And that, comes down to Stejovski's managerial ability in that second half, making those substitutions, shoring up the defense late on those last 15 to 20 minutes, where Victory were playing passes in around the penalty area, not really threatening overly as much compared to the first half. And Kisnorbo wasn't able to adapt, in my opinion. He took off Virgos for Fornaroli, a straight swap. I personally probably would have played the two strikers up top. If Kisnorbo is talking about experiments, then, experiment something different, right? Go with the two centre forwards, go with Virgos, Fornaroli, see how that plays out. Try a couple of different things. It was just the same repetitive thing, and it was just getting Victory nowhere in the end. You felt as though Victory had to rely on a set piece, or something of that nature to get back into the game, because Macarthur defensively, they were really, really solid and an impressive performance.
And this is what the Bulls do, right? They just have the ability. They're very well organised. And Christian, I agree. I think a lot of the credit here has to go to Stejovski. He sets up his team very, very well. They grind teams down and they wait for mistakes. They wait for opportunities. Jason Guerrier fluffs his defensive line. Plays Jedru onside, and then, it's a 2-on-1 easy ball across the face for Marin Jakalic to score the winning goal. It's just that slight mistake that they're always ready to capitalize on. And Jacob, I saw a line on Twitter, I can't remember who it was from, so apologies, but the irony in the fact that you've got Patrick Kisnorbo, an Australian football defensive legend, playing all with the ball, and you've got Mile Stejovski, a very famous Australian footballer in an attacking sense, and he set his team up so well behind the ball. There's a strange irony in the way these two teams went at it last night.
It's funny, isn't it, that how a coach was as a player doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same with the coaching, because there were similar complaints last season of Cole Viet when Adelaide went through that 7-game patch of, I think, only had one draw in it or something, and couldn't score a goal, and people were going, this is Cole Viet who scored the first ever goal in the A-League, and he can't get his side to score now in however many games it's been in. So it's that's always the thing, isn't it, right? A great player doesn't make a great coach. A defensive player doesn't mean they're going to be a defensive coach, and things like that. What I will say about Victory, it's quite interesting, is that they're another of the clubs this season that's moving towards this sort of back three in possession, right? We're seeing it a lot. We've seen the Socceroos do it. We've obviously seen Adelaide do it. The Wanderers have done it. Victory are doing it now as well. It's a bit strange, because it's always been, if you're an attacking team, you want to control possession, you want to dominate the game, you're going to go with a two at the back so that you've got more numbers in the midfield to control that area of the pitch. Victory are another team that transitioned to this back three, and typically the advantage of that is that on the counter, you're less susceptible to being hit on the break, right? Because you've got that extra body back, you've got extra protection there. But again, all it needs is that one mistake, and it was Jason Guerrier this time who, has been such a good player for the Victory over the last couple of seasons, and there's been talk about, even on the commentary, they were talking about how, is he going to be in with a call up for the Socceroos? If he's going and making mistakes like that, it's not doing his stocks any great. Let's be honest. But that's all it takes is one mistake. And Macarthur play in such a way, as you touched on, Lockie, that yes, they take those chances, but they have to take those chances, right? Otherwise, they're just grinding out a 0-0 draw. And in a cup final, you can't do that, because it's going to go to extra time. It's going to go to penalties. Over the course of the season, it's going to serve them well, because they're going to grind out draws where they might have lost and things like that. But they do have to take these chances, and I think it's a testament to the players themselves to have the confidence to back themselves to do that without the likes of Germain, up front. For Jakalic to be able to take that responsibility and finish that chance, and he didn't have the most fantastic season last season. There were questions about his work ethic. Was he trying hard enough? tell you what, he bloody gave it all in that game, and deserved goal, a good finish, and a great break. And Stejovski, he's sort of starting to give Macarthur a bit of something. We sort of noticed it a bit last season where they were going on a run of snatching these games late and just giving teams a really hard time, and we're seeing it more and more now. Obviously, a second cup in 3 years for them. This is a big chance for the club to really go on, and we've spoken about the newer clubs, Western and Macarthur, not really having much of an identity and feeling a bit lost. But this is a real chance for them to go strong and go in hard on this and go, look, we've won 2 cups already, right? There's not a lot of teams in Australia that not only have won 2 cups, but even won 2 domestic tournaments or competitions, right? This is huge for them. They need to go in hard. And look, I think that they can have a very good season. Based on just what we've seen here. Victory we've touted as one of the better squads in terms of their depth and composition in the entire league, and they gave them a run for their money and ended up winning the game. I think that Macarthur could do some big things this season, and Stejovski, what it is his ability to adjust. That's what makes a great coach, is not just have they got a good plan A, it's have they got a good plan B, plan C, plan D, and are they able to use those throughout the game to increase their chances of winning. And that's exactly what he did. I can't say for sure what it was that he did. I've not had a chance to go back and look at exactly the adjustments that he made, but one of the key areas was Casey Boss for Victory up the wing, bombing it forwards, and come the second half, all of a sudden that threat is sort of just nowhere to be seen, because Stejovski's just changed things around. He's made those adjustments to make that less of a threat for the Victory and really slow them down. And that's where we saw Macarthur getting those bodies behind the ball. And even when Victory had the ball in the box, they weren't able to do anything with it, because the moment they shaped up to take a shot, all of a sudden there were 3 Macarthur players in the way. So it's just those little clever things like that make a good coach. And Stejovski's not somebody who's had a lot of attention thrown on him for that side of his game. And I think that he's sort of rightfully getting it now after this final, because it was a really good display.
I think the absence of Jermaine also played a factor in how Macarthur set up for this game, because they opted for Jedru, sort of in that central area where he's more of a winger type player. And in that first half, when they went with the 4-3-3, I thought, they didn't have that Jermaine type player to really hold up the ball, come, deep, receive, and then, play off him and create those chances that way. Hence why they only had 6 shots for the entire game. But in that second half, Yakovlev sort of came in more centrally. It was more of a 2-man centre forward partnership. And then they started to work off each other a bit more. And then once they scored the goal, obviously they could, sit back and soak up a bit more pressure, and they were really hard to break down. But no, Jermaine's absence definitely played a factor, because I don't remember Macarthur being this defensive. I'm sure that won't happen, throughout the season. Sure, they'll be defensively solid, but at the same time, we will see a lot more counter-attacking football, more, I guess, progressive football in the final third. But for this game in particular, I thought, Stejovski handled it really well.
And I want to jump on the Casey Boss point, because I think he was not necessarily like a standout. I thought he played well, but he was very pivotal and deterministic in terms of how this game played out. You're right, Jacob. Victory played a back 3 in possession where Jason Gary would slide across to right centre back, and you got Hamill and Miranda. Casey Boss would effectively act as a left winger, and then Reno Pisco would slot inside into that kind of 10 in the left half space. And they managed to do those rotations in a certain way where Piscopo would often start out wide, drag his player in, Boss would slip out wide, and all of a sudden you've got a mismatch up on that wing, and you've dragged one of the Macarthur defenders out of position. And that was really good for Victory in the first half. Macarthur didn't have a clear plan to deal with it, and they were really profitable down that left-hand side, and really starving Nishan Veluplay of possession really on the right-hand side as well, which came back to bite them in the second, because as you say, Stejovski, I'm not exactly sure what changes he made, but whatever they did really stifled that left-hand side of the field for Victory. And, the ball eventually worked its way over to Veluplay. He hadn't had much of a go, didn't have too much opportunity to do much with it. And so they really were stifled in the second half. But the first half especially, Christian, Victory played some very good football. And, they couldn't find the goals, which on paper is a very similar story to last season. But at least in my view of this game, it didn't play out that way. They played some extremely attractive football in the first half. Philip Curto had an amazing game. We know he won the Mark Viduka medal. First time a goalkeeper has ever done that. lots of blocks on the line from defenders stopping shots at goal, so that had an impact as well. I really think for the victory, it was just about scoring the goals. I think actually the creating, specifically in the first half, was actually done quite well.
And that's where I think the absence of Arzani didn't really impact the victory a whole lot, besides that real final end product where Victory had to, find that goal. Because in terms of creating up until that point, like I said, Victory had a lot of chances to kill off that game. It was a similar story to last season under Popovic, where yes, they're playing one too many passes in and around the penalty area, and they're just struggling to find the right ball, because there were a couple of shots there where it wasn't the right decision, or there was another player out wide open, for example. But Philip Curto, like you mentioned, I'm not too sure if it was the great orange ball of Paul Izzo or Philip Curto, because last season they wore the same coloured jersey. Izzo with the orange against Melbourne City, the elimination final. Now Curto, he was immense last night. Really great performance. And right throughout this Australia Cup, he was interviewed as well in the presser post-match, and he even said that he's sort of building this confidence heading into the new season, and he's feeling it. And a couple of the saves he made, Velupo had a great chance in that first half, whipped the ball around into the far corner. Curto, great save. He was a real leader in that aspect. And there was a moment also with 1 minute remaining, I'm not too sure if you guys saw it, but a Macarthur player, he went to take a shot. I'm not too sure who it was from memory, instead of going to the corner flag. And once the ball went out, Curto absolutely sprinted about 50 meters across the other side. To actually have a go at him and say, "What are you doing? Why aren't you time wasting?" That's what I assume he was saying. And then, I saw a couple of people in the box saying, "Oh, he's just time wasting. That's just excuse just to, waste an extra 60 seconds." But no, that was a funny moment.
Yeah, it was Sam Bojnak, I'm pretty sure, getting an absolute reaming. And this was at a goal kick as well. And then, as you say, Curto's rushed out 50 meters to give him this spray.
He was full on sprinting.
Full on, and he was not in a rush to get back either. So one of the more inventive forms of time wasting we've seen. But credit to him, he had an amazing match last night. I want to give a shout out to Geordie Valadon as well, because Christian, I thought he was by far and away Victory's best player, completely setting the tempo of the game in that first 45 minutes. He was getting the ball in tight spaces, moving it forward. He also had to provide a lot of cover for Casey Boss in defensive transition as well on that left-hand side. So I thought he had a spectacular game.
He's been a standout player for the Victory, I think, all of pre-season from what I've seen of him. And obviously had a very good game against Adelaide and scored the winner there. I think that the fact that he's getting this confidence now, he had a good season last season and sort of emerged onto the scene, and now it's a chance to really cement his spot and show the caliber of player that he is. And I think that what we're seeing in Australia at the moment are a lot of these really talented young midfielders coming in and sort of either struggling to adapt to the pace and the physicality of the professional game compared to NPL football and some of the youth sides that they play for, or really excelling and becoming fantastic players. There hasn't seemed to really be a lot of them that have just done the job and been okay. It tends to be that they've done really, really well, or they've not done well enough. So the fact that he's getting these performances in now should serve him well come the start of the season. And I think Victory, I still maintain that Victory have one of the best squads in the league as it stands. And just looking at the way that they've played, sure, it's not been these fantastic high scoring results, or they've lost this game here against Macarthur, which is a bit of a disappointment for them. But I think that there is definitely the talent there in that squad to do big things again this season. It's about getting the best out of them. And when you've got somebody like Valadon who's kicking on and putting in good performances, that's going to be key in the heart of the midfield, because his work rate is outstanding. Like you said, Lockie, he had a lot of work to do in that game, and he did it all, without complaining. He just went about his job and did it well. So no, I think that he's going to be a very important player for the Victory this season. If he can keep fit. We've seen Ryan Teague has had some good performances over the last season as well, and that's a young midfield partnership that could do big things in the league.
Another peculiarity of the Australian football ecosystem is that no less than 11 days after the group stage of the 24-25 AFC Champions League 2 has gotten underway, the Bulls have now qualified for the 25-26 edition, so they will be back in Asia yet again.
It's crazy, isn't it? They've got to wait a whole year before they start competing again. It's maybe we'll see some contract extensions in the next couple of weeks at Macarthur just to secure some of these players in for their run in Asia. But no, you're right. It's another weird little thing with Australian football that just because it's offset to when winter is for us, but also because of the fact that the cup happens in pre-season means that you can't qualify for the current season of Asian football because it's already underway. Yeah, it's funny stuff.
All right, well, talking of Asia, it's time for match day 2 of the 24-25 Asian Champions Leagues this week. It kicks off with the Mariners at home to Buriram United at 6 p.m. on Tuesday. Bit of an odd time slot, but we take what we can get. Good to see the Mariners back in Gosford for the first time in a competitive fixture since the grand final, this time in the Champions League Elite. Christian, Buriram feature Aussies Kenny Dougal and Curtis Good as well, so some familiarity there. An opportunity for the Mariners to respond from their loss in China on match day 1. We came to the conclusion after that game that the Mariners actually probably played quite well, but perhaps some fatigue, some defensive lapses, symptomatic of a team in preseason, allowed a pretty good side to get on top of them. But that excuse does only hold for so long. Last time Buriram came to Australia last year, they downed Melbourne City as well. So it's an opportunity at home to get one back, but it's not going to be easy.
No, it won't be easy at all. And we came to the conclusion during that last game, their first game of the season for the Asian Champions League, that the Mariners hadn't played many preseason fixtures, obviously got knocked out of the Australia Cup early. And it was that sort of competitive sense that, okay, there were tiring legs. There were a few silly mistakes made, especially in those dying moments in the second half where away from home, you really have to be switched on at this top level. And I think it was just that lack of experience in the Champions League because, yes, they won the then AFC Cup last season, but this is a completely new competition and you've got to be switched on from minute 1 to minute 90. So these home games, this one here against Buriram, it's not going to be easy. Like you said, Lockie, they captured a scalp against Melbourne City. So, yeah, decent side with a couple of Aussies, as you mentioned. But these home games, they really have to nail them down. Otherwise, to get that top eight place to make it to the knockouts, if you don't win these games or at least gain a point at the worst case scenario, then, it's going to be very difficult for them to claw themselves out of this phase.
So, and you're absolutely right, Christian, because in this format, 12 in the league phase, 8 of 12 go through to the next stage, Jacob. The Mariners do have the advantage of playing these, quote unquote, lower ranked nations teams at homes. They play Buriram at home. They play Johor of Malaysia at home as well. To qualify for the next phase, potentially looking at that 8 to 10 point mark, that's roughly what we think teams are going to want to get through. Just nailing those home games and getting those 3 points in the bank and just giving yourself a chance to pick up some extras elsewhere is so important.
Oh, massively so. It's, you can't let it slip by you as a team to lose games at home. When you're losing games at home, that's a bad sign that something's not right. And, especially when this is a chance to get 6 points, potentially smash out half of what you're going to need, from the group or the league phase or whatever it's called, to get through into the next portion of the tournament, then that's an even bigger opportunity. But that's not to say that they shouldn't look to perform well in these other games as well, right? In the meantime, where it's going to be tough for them. They struggled in China, not because they didn't play well, but just things just didn't go their way, which happens in football. But they can't let that get them down, right? They've got to push on forwards and go, look, we were doing things right, and we were having a really good game. That's just football. We conceded a couple of goals. That's how things go. I think that they stand a pretty good chance in this next match. Obviously it's nothing to be taken for granted, but they're coming up against opposition who probably a level below the Mariners. They've got some players You mentioned Curtis Good, obviously, is an A-League quality player, so it's not to say that it's going to be easy for them, but I think that this is a big chance for them to get some of those points. And I think if the Mariners can play the way that they did in that last game, it shouldn't be too difficult for them. It'll be difficult in the fact that it's still a game of football, so it's going to be difficult. There's very rarely is there an easy game in football, especially in these sorts of continental competitions. Yeah. But if they play the way that they did and continue to build on that, then it should be perhaps a little bit easier than the game in China was.
This is all very eerily similar to the way that we were talking about Melbourne victory Macarthur last week when we were trying to preview the cup final. Hopefully the Mariners can go more towards the expected results.
Yeah. Abura missing their key striker, and they're going to have to rely on a winger from another club to come through and score a goal. And
wait till Kitty Dougal is left off the team sheet. Later in the week on Thursday, Sydney FC away to Kaya Aloyo in the Champions League 2. That's in the Philippines. Christian, the goal for Sydney has to be to dispatch Kaya just like they did to Eastern, and then just set themselves up for these games against Sanfrecce, which will likely determine who tops this group.
Yep, definitely. I think Sydney have the luxury of being able to rest players, midway through the second half, for example, bring off Douglas Costa, bring off some of your star names. You don't have to play the full 90 minutes, just get some minutes into the legs, get the result and go home. Because this, you'd expect, like Jacob said, football, it's a funny game. It's not guaranteed, but you think that Sydney should make a deep run in this competition, given the talent at their disposal. And a couple of weeks ago, their first competitive outing with this new side, if you want to call it that, was really impressive, like we touched on. And it sort of changed our opinions to say, okay, Sydney are probably a bit ahead of victory in terms of favourites for the championship. I know it's early days, but their movement, in and around the penalty box, some of the set pieces, especially from Costa, just shows his ability and what he can bring to this side. And yeah, I guess defensively, they're not going to have, I guess you wouldn't expect too many issues, and those queries will come at the start of the A-League season to see where they're at from that perspective. But besides that, I think it should be not a walk in the park, but you'd think that they should be able to at least make a deep run in this competition.
In terms of recent form and minutes in the legs, as you say, these sides, Mariners and Sydney, played each other a couple of days ago in a friendly. Finished 6-3 to Sydney FC. Klamala scored a hat-trick. Douglas Costa got his first goal for the club. But what is really frightening to me, we've talked about Sydney FC and all these visa attackers that they have their front four, the Pole, the Brazilian, the German, the Englishman, all looking very dangerous. But I saw James Dodd from the A-Leagues talking about this game. He was there and watching it, and absolutely raving about Leo Senna in the base of midfield. The other Brazilian, so to speak, going as far as calling him the Johnny Warren medal favourite. That is an extremely high level of praise, Jacob, not just for the league, but for the quality of players in his own team.
Yeah, and also for the position he plays. He plays mostly as a 6 as well, which, when you're talking Johnny Warren, you're usually looking a bit further up the pitch. So, no, it's, Sydney FC have done something pretty special here so far. And touch wood that there aren't any major injuries, because I'd love to see how far this team can go, because they've sort of recognised, and I think we've spoken about this on the live show, I'm not sure if we've touched on it on the pod yet, but a lot of clubs are going younger and they're sort of rebuilding their squads and starting fresh. Sydney have gone, why don't we just pinch the best players from other clubs, bring in these visa players and just dominate, right? Yeah. Like, this is our time to do that. And they've seemed to have done a pretty good job of it so far. Obviously, we have to wait and see for the league to actually start up to see where they are in terms of comparing them to other A-League sides. But when you've got these friendlies where you're winning comfortably against A-League opposition, I mean, that's the sort of scoreline you'd expect to see in an Australia Cup match against an NPL side, not a friendly match against another A-League side. So
against the treble winners.
Against the treble winners, yeah. You're right that it's kind of frightening just how good Sydney seem to be on paper at the moment, because it's been a long time since we felt like there's been a team in the league that has been this good, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah.
you know, they just seem like already people are going, these guys are going to win it.
Probably since that Sydney team with Graham Arnold, you could say a few years back, to say that dynasty that he had, that Sydney was so dominant. They won the league. I can't remember from off the top of my head, but it was like, 15 points at least. You know, they were miles ahead. And I think that I don't think it'll be similar. You got Victory, another side who we've debated, a toss up between who's the favorite. But I just want to play devil's advocate for a second, because I saw Todd's tweet and I went to look at some highlights of Leo Senna, and the video wasn't that impressive. I'm looking at it, and like there was some good switches of play, but I expected to see the way he was going on. I thought, okay, we're going to see a bit of skill moves here. We're going to see a bit of flair, but I think he's more a player that he's going to keep it really simple. And, you know, he's not the flashiest sort of player. Don't expect too much from that. But, you know, he's, I'd say, I'm not comparing it to Pirlo, but that type of player where he just keeps it really simple. You know, his passing range is supposed to be, you know, phenomenal. He can pick up, you know, anything, long ball, short passing. So from that aspect, I think that's going to be a really valuable asset for Sydney.
He reminds me a little bit of when Isaias first came to Adelaide, in the sort of the way that they play and picking out those passes and controlling the centre of the park. And Isaias obviously never won a Johnny Warren medal, but did win the Joe Marston medal as the best player in the grand finals. So, you know, perhaps there is evidence that these sort of deeper lying midfielders can still go on and have these exceptional performances throughout a season and really show that it's not just about scoring goals that's important. It's about controlling the play and creating these chances. And look, not a lot of flair on offer, but perhaps that's because it's a friendly, right? He doesn't feel the need to do it. He's just got to do the things right. Show his coach, look, this is what I can do. This is why I should be in the team. And he seems to have done that so far. So it'll be exciting to see.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to watch this game on Thursday, because the last game 2 weeks ago in the Champions League was the first time we got to see all these players together playing in the same team, and they were frightening. And so if they can get anywhere near that level of performance again, then I would go as far to say that they're the most impressive preseason A-League team I've ever seen. And I know that's 90 minutes of football, but if we get that up to 180 and I still hold the same impression, then, you know, that's scary, dangerous to me. All right, let's move on. Football Australia have announced a number of backroom staff additions to the Socceroos camp. Christian, this is the first shake-up of the Tony Popovich era. Paul Ocon and Hayden Fox will join in as assistant coaches. Frank Urich as goalkeeper coach, all of those three former Socceroos, and then an extra team analyst and sports dietitian as well. We did talk about this last week in terms of, you know, Popovich was very dismissive when asked about his backroom staff. Turns out he did shake it up a fair bit.
Yeah, and not much of a surprise, like I said on the last pod or wherever, we mentioned the coaching changes, the potential coaching changes, because I think it's a statement of intent for Popovich to say, this is my team, this is the way I'm going to go about my business. And I mean, the least surprising one out of that list is Hayden Fox. I mean, they worked together back at their time at the Wanderers. He's been there for a long time now. So, yeah, to get him in the backroom staff, obviously they know each other well. Paul Ocon has a fair bit of experience. I believe he had some coaching in Belgium. You know, former Serie A player, worked with the Australian team set up at youth level. So, yeah, he's got, you know, those ideas as well, and he knows the setup really well himself. So, yeah, you can't fault those two major moves, I guess, as a whole. You know, and the goalkeeping coach and all that sort of stuff is, I guess, Popovich, you know, analysing what's best for the team and how he can bring the best out of his playing group.
Paul Ocon, of course, a few years with the Mariners as well, in the A-League as well, so he has that coaching experience.
Yep.
Do you think, Jacob, we're going to see a similar shake-up in terms of player base? Because Popovich has to toe a very careful line, because he needs players to win games now. This is not a pick the kids and let's develop. You're in the final stage of World Cup qualification. Yeah. We have not won the first two games. He still wants to aim for, he says, top of the group and at least automatic qualification. So that has to be a mix between established and probably known quantities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be known from the Socceroos camp. And I'll go back to the example that you brought up earlier in Jason Guerrier. The Socceroos have really struggled for a solid pick at right back. And whilst Jason Guerrier only has one Socceroos camp to his name, he has a lot of Tony Popovic caps to his name.
Yeah.
So Tony knows exactly what he's going to get for Geria. As we say, he did make a mistake in the cup final that cost Victory a goal, which is a slight blemish towards this argument. But Popovic knows Geria. He's a very reliable player in general for Victory. I would not be surprised to see him as one of the players that sneaks in, especially given the horrible news of Alessandro Ciccati's ACL injury, which was horrible to hear.
Yeah. I look, there's definitely room for him changing a few things around with the squad. Obviously, that right back spot is a big one. The midfield, which is almost a constant debate of, who's available, who do you play, who do you bring, all that sort of stuff. So we could see some changes there. But in terms of players in the midfield that he's got a lot of experience with and that you'd suggest would have an upper hand of coming into the squad, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that really sings out for that as much as Jason Geria does in that right back spot. But there's definitely alternative options to sort of the old guard of, that sort of Irvine, Metcalf, who's the other one? O'Neill.
Bacchus.
These guys that we know what we're going to get from them, and they all sort of have roughly the same profile, at least when playing for the Socceroos. So is Popovic going to potentially look somewhere else there, or is he just going to go, look, we know that these guys can perform at this level, even if they haven't necessarily done so recently. Can I get that back out of them? Who knows? So you're right, Lockie, that there's room and scope for that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how much he does change, because we do know that Popovic, in terms of his coaching style, is slightly more conservative, right? He likes to play things safe but smart, right? He's a very smart coach and he knows what he's doing, but it doesn't mean that he's going to go all out attack and bomb it forwards and try and score 8 goals and things like that. He's going to play it smart to the point where you're going to get the result, but it might not be pretty. And that's obviously a criticism people had of Arnold, because then he didn't start getting those results. And so you're playing ugly football and losing, which isn't a great recipe. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because a lot of the players in that team have been around for a long time. And this could almost sort of be I don't want to draw the comparison, but I'm going to bring it up, is Gareth Southgate, in terms of when he came into when he came into the England setup, there was this established core of players who had been there and done that, hadn't achieved the levels of success that people had expected of them. And Southgate came in and he didn't just go, right, I've got these great players who, we know what we're going to get from them. I'm going to cut that all out, right? If they're not good enough, they're not good enough anymore. They're gone. Don't care about, the name recognition, what they've done in the past, because we need to change things. And moving forwards, we've got to have a successful team. And while, yes, the Socceroos need to win now, they also need to be able to win later as well. And that's where finding that balance is going to be a really tricky thing for Popovic to try and juggle, because, you can play some strong squads now and get those results, but are they going to be performing at that same level in a few years' time come the World Cup? Or are you going to have a much more green squad there who aren't going to be able to perform to the level that you'd have liked had they have had more minutes in the legs? So it's a really difficult one. And you're right to point it out, Lockie, it's something that could be interesting. But we've seen that with the coaching staff, he's been happy to make some changes, right? He's not afraid to do that. So, does the same extend to the players? I'd have my reservations about wholesale changes. I think there are a couple of spots where he'll look to bring alternative options in just to see what's out there and see what works. I don't think we'll see a complete sort of remake of, the fundamental core of the squad or anything like that. But I mean, you never know, it could happen. And, he was dismissive of making coaching changes and then went and did it anyway. So, the same could extend here.
Is there going to be room for international friendlies later on? Because I think that window is going to be really important for Popovic if he does get an opportunity. I'm sure there will be at least a window or two, or there may not be.
I'm not sure there is. Not before the end of World Cup qualification.
He really doesn't have no room for error, I guess, because he at least have a couple of games to use those to experiment a bit. But now, like Jacob said, you've got to go out and win. Like, he's got to select the best possible 11, the best 15 players available to, get the 3 points, because Australia are in a position now where 1 point from out of a possible 6 and languishing, near mid-table. It's desperate times, and it depends, who does he select? Does he go with the fundamental core that have, been there and done that for the Socceroos recently, or does he pick a couple of players who might be a bit raw, including Guerra, who, yes, he's older, but he only has that one cap, which was back in 2016. And don't dismiss international football and club football, because, they're not the same. They're two completely different beasts. So, yeah, from that aspect, this Popovich trusts Guerra. They've worked under, a good relationship in the past with Victory, so that could work in Guerra's favor. But, it can be, very risky. Indeed, we'll have to wait and see.
The other name that I've seen a lot of people talking about is Mitch Langerak. Now, this is a significantly more complicated case. People were attaching John Crawley's name, who is now the former goalkeeping coach of the Socceroos, to this situation as well. The facts that we do know is that throughout the qualification process for the last World Cup, a lot of players were asked to make a lot of sacrifices through a COVID world in terms of quarantining. Aaron Moyes, the famous example, he spent a lot of time away from his club and forfeited a lot of wages because the rules in China were so stringent just to be able to play for the Socceroos and get us to a World Cup at all. Langerak, for whatever reason, we can't say with any certainty what it is, did not make some of those sacrifices. Whether that was his choice or not, again, we don't know. He was brought in for that one camp, and then whatever happened in there happened there, and then he retired from international football. So, again, without knowing the entire story, it's tricky to know, Jacob, but potentially some of the people that may have objected to Langerak being there could now be gone, and that potentially, again, there's lots of ifs here, open the doors for him to make a comeback. And he has been doing very well in Japan.
He's been doing fantastically well in Japan, but is that the biggest problem for Australia right now? And I don't think that it is, right? I mean,
Matt Ryan and Joe Gauci aren't playing.
No, well, Joe Gauci actually did play.
Played once.
He played in the Cup for Aston Villa. And I still think should be the regular starter for the Socceroos, and it's pretty absurd that he's not, because he is going to be the starting goalkeeper for the Socceroos for the next few years. And the fact that he's not getting those minutes now is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But a new regime comes in, and, Langerak coming in provides competition, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that if you've got somebody who's performing well to come in doing your job, no, that's my job. That's what I'm here for. No, this guy's also been brought in for that too, mate. So now you've got to perform to his level and even further than that, and do better than him so that you can keep your spot. That's always a good thing. But I just don't know that goalkeeping is the big issue right now for the Socceroos. Yes, the keepers aren't getting a huge number of minutes at the club level, but I don't think I can remember Matt Ryan dropping a stinker for the Socceroos, yes, but the last couple of games where the team hasn't played well, it's not been his fault, right? Like the goal conceded to, was it Indonesia? That's off a deflection. Not a lot that you can do there about that one. And I don't think
the Bahrain game.
Was it Bahrain? Yeah. Not a lot he could do about that. And it's like, he hasn't done anything fundamentally wrong to deserve being replaced. Similarly, Joe Gauci hasn't really had a chance with the Socceroos to show what he can do, but we know what he can do at a club level. So I don't think that it's a massive issue. And it really depends, right? In terms of, are you going to get the level of performance out of this player that you need if you're going to bring them in? Is it worth doing that? Is it worth all of that media scrutiny of, you're bringing back in a player who retired because he didn't make the right sacrifices to join the team the last time, and there was falling outs among the squad and the coaching staff and like, do you want to go through all of that just to have another goalkeeper come in who might not even get those starting minutes, or do you want to focus your attention on other areas of the pitch, like right back, like in the centre of the midfield, where there are significant shortages of quality, at least from what we've seen, and those players who have been picked, and you need to make changes there? Or do you focus on bringing in, a player who's had his chance, didn't make the sacrifices that were necessary to really capitalize on that? So, yeah.
Look, I agree with you that goalkeeping is not probably the biggest issue. But what I will say is the first camp is where you get to set your standards. And it's the easiest point out of absolutely all of them in the future to be able to make radical changes and that be okay. So, it's not the biggest issue. But then again, you talk about Joe Gauci. I don't even think it's out of the realms of possibility that Joe Gauci just gets the starting spot. And that's the precedent that Popovic wants to set in that area, because you're right. He does have the better long-term future, but Matty Ryan is the captain of the team. Is he the number one goalkeeper to the 26 World Cup, which is probably what Popovic is more concerned about, Christian.
I was going to say, if you remember back when Postecoglou was coaching, before pre-Brazil World Cup in 2014, there was still the 50-50 chance of either Matt Ryan starting or Mitch Langerak. And I believe Langerak was still at Dortmund at the time, but he wasn't getting as many minutes. But Postecoglou opted for Ryan mainly because of his skill on the ball, playing out from the back. And Postecoglou went with that identity. And Popovic could come in and, you're right, Lockie could say, okay, I want Joe Gauci as my main, focal point of my spine in that back line. And it could be his way of saying, yeah, this is my team. That's going to be my decision going forward. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, but you're right, Jacob. It's not a massive area to say, okay, this needs massive fixing, because Matt Ryan's been a veteran. He's been, the captain of the Socceroos, real leader in that defensive line. So yeah, from that perspective, it's not a major issue per se, but it's not out of the realms of possibility that Gauci or someone, or even Langerak, could get a starting spot.
All right, well, rolling over to a Socceroos team that has been winning games, surprisingly, the young Socceroos have qualified for the Under-20 Asian World Cup to take place in China next February. A win over Palestine and a tense 0-0 draw with Saudi Arabia rounded out the group stage for 3 wins and a draw, finished second on goal difference to Saudi Arabia. They're through as a best-placed runner-up. And Jacob caps off a rather successful week of competition. And when I say week, it has been 7 days, or day on, day off for 4 games in the group stage. That's a lot of football.
It's a hell of a lot of football at a pretty high level as well, against some of the other best youngsters in Asia. So, really showing what they're made of. And again, these young Australian sides going out there and proving that we have quality player development and just quality players here in Australia that are ready to push on and do big things with their career. It's about taking those next steps and making sure those pathways are there for them. But this is fantastic to see that, in direct opposition to rivals in Asia, that Australia are doing very, very well and have these players and these stocks for the future. It's now about, making sure that they continue on this path and that they continue to develop and that they end up in the senior squad as very good players, but as promising signs. And while, yes, finishing second isn't fantastic, it was only on goal difference, as you mentioned, Lockie. So, it's not the biggest issue in the world. You managed to draw 0-0 against the top team anyway, so proving that you're about equal with them, and played some actually really good football. I've caught some little highlights of it and stuff as it pops up on Twitter or Reddit or wherever, and it's just dynamic and it's fluid and it's really exciting to watch. And it's almost sort of a stark difference to what we were seeing from the senior team over the last few months, where you sort of go, how do we have these youngsters playing such great football? But when players are making that step up into the senior setup, it's almost like things are turned back down a level again. And, they're sort of like, all right, let's just be a little bit, more conservative on the ball and things like that. So it's this conversation we're always having of sort of having this united sort of vision for football in the country and where it's going to go. And it's about making sure that we've got these alignments with our national teams where you're having these players stepping up and they're playing good football all the way through. And it's not, they're playing good football at some levels and then at other levels they're doing things differently. So they don't quite fit in, or, they're doing this or that. And it's a little bit disjointed, but perhaps, Popovic coming in is going to provide that opportunity to sort of realign things a little bit better here and show that there are those pathways open. Because what's been this thing with the Socceroos and with Arnie was always, he doesn't play the kids enough, and it's always the same veteran players that we're seeing out there. We're talking about Popovic having the chance to stamp his authority onto this is what the team's going to look like, and it's his chance now to show these young players that these pathways are still open for them if they continue to perform at a good level, and that even though you might be on the younger side, there is that option for you in a year, 2 years time as you develop to get into the senior setup.
Finally, in the lead up to the A-League season, it seems we're getting another TV show, which is a very welcome addition to the media landscape. We have Dub Zone for the Women's League, and now also we seem to have the weekly kickoff. This was announced late last week and teased on the Cup final broadcast. It will see the 10 football team dissect all the latest from across both the men's and the women's league every Wednesday on Paramount Plus and 10 Play at 5 p.m. and then on 10 Bold as an encore at 10:30 as well. Christian, this is starting October 9th. That's kind of all the details we have. It was kind of hidden in a Channel 10 PR document that got shot out. And there's a lot of ifs around this as well. We need to see the quality of the products. But what we do know, and it's one of the reasons why we're here, is that football needs more conversation and discussion in Australia. So the more the merrier, I say.
100%. The more TV programs are out there just to provide that education aspect for fans and just an entertainment factor, because I think the game has been lacking in that aspect for the past few years. And, they've had the dub show, I believe, even last year. That was really good with Teo and a few of the former W Leagues players, or A Leagues players now, I should say. So that was really good. But to have, covering both the men and women now with this show coming in, I think it's nothing but positive news. Obviously, I was at the game last night, so I didn't catch the promo, but did it say anything about who would be featuring, or still?
Well, you're asking the wrong people, because I know Jacob didn't catch it live and I was on the ground as well. So I did try asking that question in our group chat. I didn't get any responses, but on the PR release.
The whole 10 football team thing seems to suggest it will be the same people we see during the broadcast.
Yeah,
that's more of a panel show discussion.
I know, Daniel McBreen has talked about his want to do the kind of tactical analysis. He did some last night. He did some in the back end of last year's A-League season when the production companies changed, because that is a production issue. So with a new deal with JamTV this year, it'll be interesting to see what the A-Leagues cook up. But, part of that release as well is that it wasn't just on-field live content they were talking about. So hopefully this is another way to just generate more discussion in any way you can, get people talking about the league. As you say, Christian, educate and entertain them, but just giving them a way to engage with the league, engage with the games and the players throughout the week. So it's not, the on switch on the weekend, Jacob, and then you listen to your podcast on Monday or Tuesday and then you forget about it for another few days. It's just consistently engaging with the league, and it's the discussion that will grow the league at the end of the day.
For sure. And it's, it's one of those things where the more the merrier, as Christian said earlier, the more that we've got, the better. And I think it's great. Yeah, I think it's great. I'm hoping that it's going to be good and it's not just the same tired old talking points that are repeated over and over again. But I'll try and put my negativity and pessimism aside for once and hold out hope that it'll be a good watch and it'll be entertaining and it'll sort of reinvigorate everyone's interest in the league.
Absolutely, I'm sure it will. All right, that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Christian Montegan, thank you, mate.
Appreciate it.
And Jacob Stevens as well.
Thank you very much, Lockie.
All right, we'll be back on Friday to recap the week's worth of Asian fixtures, Central Coast Mariners and Sydney FC, of course. But thank you all very much for listening today. Goodbye.